Hello everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to be just doing a quick update to my Mutant deck. This is just a fun deck, certainly for locals. It's cool because you can kind of fit in a lot of those really degenerate, unfair cards like Dimension Shifter, There Can Be Only One, etc. Nothing super new and exciting with the like the cards you can play, but I'm just going to go through the deck as it is and go from there. So we've got the Mutant MO5, which searches for mutant monsters on summon. ST46 searches for spell traps on summon. And Mutant can special summon itself if you control a mutant card. And then they all share the effect to banish a monster spell trap and then summon the according monster. Mutant is the exception because it banishes a mutant card from deck to do that effect, which is really nice because it doesn't cost you hand advantage, which is probably the biggest issue with this deck is that card advantage is hard to come by if you're using these to banish the cards to summon out your bigger mutants. So speaking of the bigger mutants, I'm just playing one of each. There's certainly an argument for like a second beast, but just one of each for now. They're the mutant monsters. The spells for the mutants, keeping it really simple, is one evolution lab and one mutant fusion. They're both kind of mediocre. This one can summon a mutant from hand or from banished on activation only, and then you can once per turn put a mutant back from your hand to the bottom of the deck to draw a card. That of course conflicts with Pot of Prosperity, but otherwise it's a way of just getting the brick mutants out of your hand. Mutant Fusion is a fusion spell, of course, but if your opponent has activated a card or effect, you can banish materials from deck and graveyard, which is pretty nice. It's just like a searchable option, so you don't really use it all the time. And then for the mutant traps, we're on 2 expansion and 2 cry. Expansion summons a level 4 or lower mutant from deck, or adds it to hand, and then it's got a nice effect that you can banish it to protect one of your mutants from a card effect destruction, which is it's fine. It comes up sometimes, but the benefit to this is that it is continuous trap card, so it sticks on the field after you've used its effect, and then you can use it as fodder for your bigger mutants to banish them to activate their effects. And then Cry is also a fusion spell, but it's obviously a trap card, and it shuffles the materials back from banished and grave. So Mutant Cry is really nice because you're using this on your opponent's turn to summon Synthesis, which is a pop. It can also summon Ultimus, which is the negation, but on your opponent's turn, you're more often going to be going for Synthesis because, as well, Ultimus is hard to summon. The other cards we are playing, this is something that I want to, and I've been testing out as well, is actually playing some Thunder Dragons. So we're playing 2 Dark, 2 Raw, and 1 Hawk. Now, the Hawk is probably not super necessary, but the benefit to Hawk is that it can bring back a body. So I guess if you're trying to push eventually for lethal, it's nice. But the benefit to the Thunder Dragons is that they can help ensure your card advantage stays kind of even. So in a hypothetical scenario, you normal your MO5, use its effect to search, but then you can use it to banish itself. So it attributes itself as cost, and then it banishes a Thunder Dragon. Well, banishes a monster, right? Because monster is the best one to summon out Beast. So you've summoned Beast to the field, and you get to trigger Dark to search for Raw. And what this does is just gives you another material to banish with a future mutant. Obviously, you're not going to be using one of the lower level mutants to summon by banishing the Raw to summon a second beast, because we're not playing a second beast, and having 2 beasts is not necessary because all the effects are once per turn anyway. But the Raw becomes beast food for next turn, so you can negate the spell card your opponent activates by banishing the Raw from your hand. The Raw will trigger, it will summon the Thunder Dragon Dark, and then again, if you've got another mutant or whatever you do have, can banish the Dark. So if you can set up Beast and Arsenal, for example, the Arsenal can banish the Dark to banish an opponent's monster when they activate an effect, and then that Dark can search, and you can either search for the Raw or the Hawk at that point. It really is up to you. And obviously you can do the same thing if you start with the raw, banish the raw, summon the dark, and you just get kind of like a loop of resources with the Thunder Dragons, which is something that the Mutant deck really lacks. So I haven't tried it before, I don't know why, but yeah, in theory it sounds solid. Obviously the big downside is of course that it takes up, 5 brick slots in the deck, but that's okay. Playing 3 Pot of Prosperity and 3 E-Telly, these are more starters, and Prosperity helps dig for what you need. Can be some of those more oppressive cards that I mentioned before, like, well, it can't obviously search Dimension Shifter because the new Dimension Shifter can't be activated, but it can certainly search side cards, your 1-card starters. So the benefit to this deck is that it's all 1-card starters. So yes, we're playing things like, the Thunder Dragons and the bigger mutants, which you don't really, well, and you don't want to see the bigger mutants. You're not really too mad about seeing a Thunder Dragon, but you don't want to see multiples. So the deck being all 1-card starters is nice because you can always just banish those extra ones out of your hand. And then the last 12 slots are kind of like our non-engine, but it's just all these kind of big haymaker cards. So Shifter, Droll, obviously there's a conflict between Shifter and Droll, but that's just this format at the moment. Seeing one of those is pretty good. Super Poly is also another kind of decent option, and then There Can Be Only One is pretty oppressive. Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to a time when, like, obviously with Kashtira, once that eventually falls out of the format with a ban list, that Shifter becomes a lot stronger. I know Shifter is obviously very good against a lot of decks, but with Kashtira hopefully eventually going to be out of the format with a ban list, then Shifter becomes a lot more powerful because decks aren't really as prepared for it. But right now, people are prepared for it. For the extra deck, you don't really use a lot of this. So we've got 2 Ultimates, you probably only need 1. 3 Synthesis, you could probably get away with 2 as well, just in a grind though. I've just got a bunch of Super Poly targets. So Starving Venom, Garuba, Mud Dragon, like they're the main 2 obviously, Dragostapelia, Earth Golem, just randomly Cyberburst Link monster that could come up. This was the Draconite quest. I know they can come up against like Vanadium, for example. That's a dragon and a warrior that you need for this one. I'm fairly sure, so that would be fine. Then just some generic link monsters like Access, Unicorn, Phoenix, Dark. You're probably not really summoning these because you don't really have that kind of material to do that, but yeah, they can come up. It's mainly just the fusions that you really care about. I don't have a side deck prepared for this, but you certainly would side Macrocosmos because this deck really wants its cards banished, especially the mutant named cards. So I obviously didn't go into much detail about the cards themselves, but if I just really focus on the bigger mutants for a moment, so this kind of version of the deck is aiming to kind of keep these guys around a little bit more. So I know in the past when I've played this, I'm fairly trigger happy with banishing them for their own effects. So like Beast banish itself to negate the spell, or Arsenal banish itself to banish a monster, for example. But in this variant, I kind of want to keep them around a little bit because if your opponent outs them, then you are recurring your resources, which are the banished mutant cards. Which is nice enough. The fact that they all float is really good. The Synthesis, it floats also, and then so does the Ultimates. They all float, but usually because you're banishing cards to activate effects, then you don't really get to see the benefit of all the floating. But I'm trying to, so this variant, I'm trying to keep them around. That's also why I'm playing the Thunder Dragons, because it just gives you more fuel to banish with these guys rather than having to banish them themselves. If you've played the deck at all, then you know that you do want to have some of them banished at times, because that's going to help fuel Mutant Cry to summon the Synthesis. But otherwise, yeah, I'm trying to keep them around that little bit more, just because of the floating effects as well, and because they're just big bodies, so they do help kind of push for game going into the following turns. But otherwise, I'm going to do just a couple of quick test hands just to show you kind of what the deck looks like. Okay, so for our first test hand, we're not going to play these out. There's not really many combos the deck does, but we've got E-Telly, Deck Only One, Super Poly, Deck Only One, and Super Poly. So it's obviously not that interesting of a hand. really only have E-Telly as far as combo goes, but that's just going to be E-Telly, summon MO5, probably just search for ST46 for follow-up, and then we're going to be banishing probably just one of the There Can Be Only ones to summon Arsenal, just because it's the strongest out of what we have. We don't really want to banish the ST46. I'll play it out just because I'm aware that not everyone's going to necessarily understand how the cards work. So it'd be MO5 here with E-Telly. MO5 is going to search ST46 as the follow-up. Yep. Then that's going to be in hand. We'll tribute MO5 for its effect, banishing a There Can Be Only One to summon out Arsenal. And then we are setting a Super Poly in a There Can Be Only One and passing with this. So we've got these, we've got this. The ST46 is going to be the follow-up. The Super Poly is a discard for the Super Poly. In this instance, the Arsenal has to either banish itself or that There Can Be Only One to use its effect to banish a monster. So its effect says if your opponent when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect to banish a card from hand or field, target a monster on the field and banish it. So you've got to banish something. Depends on, I guess, what you see your opponent doing. Banishing itself is probably fine depending on what is going on. You've got Super Poly still to generate a body, or if you Super Poly first, you can banish the body from Super Poly for Arsenal there. But that's the first one. That's like that first test hand, you know, obviously didn't have as much engine, but it's still showing what the deck is trying to do. You're setting up one or two of the big mutants and going from there. So we've got 3, 4, 5, double Super Poly again. So for this one, we can start with Prosperity, banishing any 6, like you can banish an Ultimates, you can banish one Synthesis, any of the more niche Super Poly targets can be banished, really the links can be banished too, but we banish 6, we're going to reveal Mist, Mutant, MO5, Dark, and Beast. So obviously we don't want Mist or Beast because we can just summon these from deck. The Dark is the interesting one here just because we can kind of generate some pluses here. Mutant is another interesting one too because it just allows us to extend, but we'll take the Dark in this case just to kind of show how it operates. I mean, it's nothing too crazy as far as the way that it operates, but we can normal ST46. Its effect searches a mutant spell trap. The way I play this deck as well is, in this instance, it searches a spell trap. We've got Cry, we've got Expansion, they're the 2 traps, and then we've got the 2 spells. But what we're looking for is a way to access one of the little mutants going into the next turn. So because we don't have any other little mutants, we will certainly grab Expansion because this just allows the mutants to loop each other. Because what we can do with the Expansion is when it's activated, it takes a level 4 or lower mutant and either summons it or adds it to hand. We can use this to summon an MO5 on our opponent's turn, which is the monster searcher. It can search for an ST46 and they can loop each other as long as you've got copies of the mutants. So ST46 search this summon MO5, which searches ST46. So there's a little loop going on here. And we kind of keep that going as long as we can with the mutant monsters. So here we're going to tribute ST46 and banish Dark to summon out Beast. We then get to trigger the Dark to search for Raw, which becomes food for the Beast on our opponent's turn. Then we're going to set our 3 cards. So we've got Cry, we've got Super Poly, and we've got Expansion. The other thing when we're thinking about our disruptions going into our opponent's turn, so this is our hand. Obviously, we've got the 3 here. We've got the Beast. So we've got our spell negate. Super Poly is Super Poly. We can obviously discard the Super Poly. We've got Cry, which is not live at this point. It has to shuffle back, to summon the Synthesis. We need mutants with 2 different attributes. So right now, we want to shuffle back the ST46 just because it's that free resource in the graveyard. So there is an argument to banish Beast per its effect instead of banishing the Raw, because that will give us food for Cry, or we leave it, we banish the Raw. So going into our opponent's turn, we might banish the Raw, and then obviously that's going to generate another body with the Raw effect. So we've negated a spell, we've summoned the Dark. We can wait for this to die if our opponent outs it. It is immune to monster effects. Double check. Yeah, it can't be targeted by monster effects, sorry. So it's still fairly hard to out. Expansion is going to protect it from battle or destruction once, so it banishes itself to do that. And then obviously we've got Cry. So if they out it, we can then use Cry to summon Synthesis. But if we do want to be that little bit more aggressive with our interruptions, we can banish the Beast for its own effect, which doesn't do the Raw into Dark. So then the Cry is turned on to banish, to shuffle back the Beast and the ST46. The other thing we can do is expansion, summon MO5. MO5 can search for one of the bigger mutants, which again, normally is not how I would like to play it. I'd rather search the follow-up, but then this could be like a discard for Super Poly to then shuffle back, which is probably not the best thing to do at all. But definitely Beast banishing itself, so Cry can use its effect, is not terrible, but also banishing the Raw for the free bodies is kind of nice too. Important to note that the Raw, the monster summoned off Raw, will add itself back to hand if it's still on the field. So the Dark will either go back to hand or it will go to the graveyard if your opponent outs it, and search. So for our next one, we've got Droll, Raw, ST46, ST46, and MO5. So because we've got both ST46 and MO5, there's a kind of a cool little play we can do. It wouldn't involve banishing the Raw. But in this case, if we banish the Raw, we will actually play into Nibiru, which we don't want to do. Like as a control deck, you don't want to be banishing, playing into Nibiru at all, because we're going to lose our monsters, obviously. So we can go SD46, use its effect to search for the Evolution Lab. Then what we can do is we can tribute the ST46, banishing the MO5 to summon out Beast. We activate the Evolution Lab, and its effect on activation can summon back the MO5, which can trigger its effect to search for a mutant monster. Now we already have ST46 for follow-up, so we can grab Mutant. Again, we don't want to play into Nibiru, so grabbing the Mutant doesn't really... we're not going to really use it on this turn, but now what we're going to do is we're going to use MO5. Oh, sorry. What we can actually do before we go any further is we're going to use the Evolution Lab as the body for this to summon Mist. Mist is not the strongest. It's the weakest of the three. It will kind of give us not protection against evenly matched, but it would, for example, let us draw cards if our opponent were to use evenly matched. But because we've got excess mutants in our hands, we could actually use the ST46 to put the mutant back to the bottom of the deck and draw a card, which is probably a good thing to do. Then we can use the MO5, tributing itself, banishing the Evolution Lab to summon out Mist. So I haven't gone over Mist effect because it's not really that good. But Mist says that it cannot be targeted by spells, and if your opponent activates a trap card, you can banish a card to draw 2 and just draw 2. So yeah, we've not played into Nibiru. Now we're going to set Super Poly, and we've got our 3 cards in hand. Obviously, Droll is decent, and then we can, when we use the Beast or the Mist, if we ever get to use the Mist, We can beast, banish raw, and that will summon dark. And we've got, again, just more food to kind of work with there as well. We'll do one more. As you can see, I mean, it's not a crazy deck, but the fact that you get to play, like, there can be only one Super Volley, Droll, Dimension Shifter, like, they're all pretty good cards. So they're all, you know, kind of big haymakers in one way or another. Dark, Prosperity, Prosperity, Beast, and E-Telly. So again, not much in the way of the non-engine disruptions, which make the deck really strong. So we could start with Prosperity, banish 6 random things. We've got Cry, Super Poly, MO5, SD46, Expansion, and Hawk. Here, we've obviously got E-Telly to access any mutant we like. What we might do is grab ST46 as like a normal summon. We will bottom those. We can normal ST46. We're going to use this to summon Mutant this time, just to kind of show where it fits in. So we'll go ST46, use its effect. We're going to search Expansion. Again, this guarantees the follow-up. If you would rather, search Cry as a disruption, that of course is an option as well. But just to kind of guarantee that, I mean, we've got Prosperity to also kind of guarantee follow-up. So no, let's not grab Expansion. We'll grab Cry. So now we're going to tribute ST46. Obviously we've got the dark in hand, so we'll banish that. ST46 will summon Beast. Which of course is in our hand. So that is unfortunate. We'll summon Beast. Dark will trigger though to grab Raw, so we're not really minusing as hard as we have in the past with mutants. We're going to E-Telly for Mutant. Now, when you don't want to use Mutant when you're going close to time, so potentially you side this out in game 3, depending on how much time is left, because this burns you the attack of the mutant you summon, which is minimum 24, maximum 3k. But when we tribute the Mutant, it banishes a mutant card from deck as cost. So what we will banish is a mutant card, usually a mutant trap card that we want in our hand. So we'll probably just banish the Expansion just so that we can access it. So that's going to banish the Expansion as cost, and it's going to summon Arsenal. So again, what's really important here is that we have not played into Nibiru, but also these are the best two. So this is the Spell Negate, this is a Monster Banish. We've taken 3k life, which is unfortunate, but had to be done. We're going to set Cry. Then going into our opponent's turn, what we do have is, with the trap banished, if the Beast gets outed, destroyed in some way, it will add the Expansion to hand, which then obviously does guarantee our follow-up. When Arsenal's outed, it will add a spell, which we don't have access to, but the Beast does. Now the other thing we will want to do is, so we're fine if Beast gets outed for Expansion, but we also have Cry. So we might want to try and wait, let Beast get outed. Obviously we can use Arsenal or Beast to banish the Raw, which would summon the Dark. So again, as far as mutant food goes, we can banish the Dark. So both of these have been paid for with one Thunder Dragon, and then the Dark will also search a Raw going into the next turn, which is, again, really nice just for advantage, just to kind of keep, mitigating the banish effects. But then, suppose our opponent does out the Beast, we get the Expansion back, and then we can use Cry, shuffle back the Beast and one of the mutant cards in order to summon Synthesis and pop a card, which is nice. The last thing I'll say before kind of just wrapping this video up is that the mutants really love their cards banished. So just then you would have seen that the Mutant Cry has ended up in the graveyard. The unfortunate thing is that it's really hard to get this now out of the graveyard when it's there. So having macro up is awesome because the Cry gets banished, and then it just gives you more things to recycle with your bigger mutants. But otherwise, yeah, if they're in the graveyard, they're a lot harder to recover. The only real way to get them back is through Ultimus, because he will banish the card he banishes a mutant card from hand, grave, or face-up field to negate the same thing that you're banishing. So if you want to negate a trap, you'd have to banish the Cry from the graveyard. But yeah, that's like, you rarely summon the Ultimus. But otherwise, that is the Mutant deck. I'm really actually keen to go and test out the Thunder Dragons just that little bit more, because again, I've always kind of had Mutant Thunder Dragon as a concept. It's not an unknown thing, but just using a small Thunder Dragon engine as like a recurable, or reusable loop. Yeah, I've never actually just tested that before, so something that I'm keen to really give a go. But otherwise, that's the Mutant deck. It's one of my favorite decks. Not the strongest, but definitely one to give a go if you haven't. But otherwise, that'll be it for this one.